The slap heard round the world. Come on, video. Focus here. Focus here, people. This is what we've all been focused on this past week, isn't it? Despite the horrendous things that are going on around the world, everything from the fact that we're still kind of struggling with this pandemic, even though in many ways it sort of seems like it's over. Is it really? What's going on there? I know I have to take 2 PCR tests over the next week in order to gain access to different events I want to go to. And meanwhile, war in Ukraine and 70-degree weather in Antarctica. There's so much intenseness happening in our real 3D world, and yet how much focus, time, energy, attention has gone into. I know it's grabbed me. And based on the response that I've gotten on social media, just from a couple of innocuous, especially the first one, quite innocuous posts, and boom, it blew up. All I didn't even mention what I was speaking about. I think I simply wrote a single sentence. I can't say I would necessarily have done differently. Everyone, of course, knew what I was talking about because it's what everybody's talking about. And boom, a barrage of responses. People, some people back, saying that they feel the same way. Others saying, oh, is this what you teach with the evolved masculine? Oh, how enlightened of you. Looks like you've got a lot of work to do. Then, of course, there's this range of responses in women, which I think is a big part of what we're going to end up being going to be tackling today, since this is, after all, the Decoding Women podcast, and I am your guest, Destin Garrick. It's somewhere around here or here. This podcast, again, is really focused on helping men particularly deepen our understanding of women and what it is that women are communicating to us, both on an individual level as well as on a larger collective level. And boom, what an opportunity right here in our face. Some huge I don't know, it's a talking point. It's like some people are like, oh, who cares? It's just celebrities. But what these celebrities really are being is like, they're an opportunity for us, an access point for us to engage on conversations that clearly we need to be having. It's not about Will Smith and Chris Rock and Jada Pinkett Smith, all of whom personally I love, especially the Smith family. They're love them. But really, they're acting as archetypes. Yeah, we've all been in one form or another in all of their shoes, haven't we? Whether it is being feeling ridiculed publicly by somebody else or by others, and feeling a wide range of emotions and pain and sadness as a result. We've all either felt a flash of desire, or actually engaged either physically violently or emotionally or verbally towards somebody in defense or reaction, either to an insult against oneself or somebody that we care about. And we've all, haven't we, been insensitive to the experience of other people. And so these are our archetypes. These are ideas or characters that have played out throughout cultures, throughout time, that we can see and we can understand and we can identify with. And I think that has a lot to do with why there is such strong reaction, such strong response, is that on one level or another, we see ourselves in these individuals, and we see our shadows in these individuals. I.e., by shadow, I mean the parts of ourselves that we deny, that we disidentify with, that we define ourselves as not being. I am not that. I would never be that. Yeah! But generally speaking, when there is such an intensity of an emotional response, there's something in there for us to look more deeply at ourselves. And why am I having such a strong response? Remove the celebrity component from it for a moment. Why are we having such a response on an individual level? The place that I went to was with the identification of Will Smith, partly because I mean, I'll put him in one of my role model categories, you know, a man that like I track, I pay attention to different parts of his path and have for 20 something years, and who, you know, I find very admirable. Um, which is one of the reasons why I think there's been such a strong response is because it's so unexpected. You know, there are plenty of people in Hollywood who, if such a thing happened, we're like, well, you know, they're kind of like that. But this is not generally something we would look at Will Smith and be like, oh yeah, there's a violent man there. You know, he historically he has kind of been the representative of the opposite of that. You know, I mean, he's been famous for 20 some odd years as like not even willing to curse in his songs. So we've just been very buttoned up, doing the right thing, etc., which I imagine creates enormous pressures. And living in those enormous pressures, throw on top of that, and quite frankly, a huge element of that, you know, being a black man in Hollywood, who a black man in American society who is, you know, has been at a pinnacle of fame, and who has been seen as that sort of like uh, model minority, that model representation of a black man, and all the pressures to be quote unquote perfect at all times, and bah, here he is in his imperfection. Here it is, his flaws on, you know, for all the world to see. Now, as a man who puts himself out there as a voice for the evolved masculine, God, can I identify with elements of that? These elements of uh, uh, pressures, external and of course internalized, of needing to be this certain idea of perfection, when I am extremely aware of my own flaws. And so, what I do my best to do instead is to just be as transparent as possible with my flaws and allow that to be an aspect of the modeling that I attempt to do. That um, I do not view myself as a perfect representative of the evolved masculine, nor do I ever expect to be, nor do I ever expect to meet somebody who I view as being a perfection. To me, the evolved masculine has always been about an ideal to strive towards, a North Star to guide the way, including for myself. And so I identified with Will Smith's, I'm going to call it reaction, because that's what it was. In that moment, he was not in his prefrontal cortex. He was not in the higher thinking aspects of the brain. Like a fight or flight mechanism went off inside of him, and fight clearly won out. That at that point, his rational mind could not step in. I know that I struggled with this aspect of myself for so long, and I can't say I'm completely past that struggle. It's more that I have grown dramatically in it, and I've done so through a lot of the things that I've learned through the pain of feeling like this aspect of myself was running the show. That here I can be completely calm and collected and on and incredibly spacious, but if that part of me got triggered, that rage monster, so to speak, could come out, and in that moment I'd feel like I had no control. I had no control. Yes, I could want to read so many thought pieces of, oh, well, he should have X, or he could have done Y, and oh, it would have been so much more enlightened or a better example if blah, 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 blah. In that moment, it was impossible for him. In that moment, something switched inside of him. There was a trigger that set off. Maybe you were familiar with this. Maybe what happened there would not have triggered you. But chances are, you know your triggers. At least I hope you do. If you really think about it, you know that there are certain things that can just activate you, and maybe an angry, like an externally angry response is not your go-to. Maybe it is more of a freeze. Maybe it is more of a shutdown. Maybe it is like I'm out of here, bolting, run. Or maybe it is But we all have our triggers. And the thing about those triggers is that when they're really hit, in that moment, it can feel like those your calm is gone. Your ability to think rationally is just not there. This feeling like you can just like, oh, well, let me think about this. What would be the best and most responsible way to handle this situation in this moment? It's not a part of the equation. This is the whole like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde type of phenomenon. It's just this other part, more primal part of you is activated. And that is very much what I saw as being on display in those clips, because no, I did not watch it live like most of you. So again, please engage the comments here, because I know that it certainly went off on my social media, and I particularly am going to be diving in today about the things that I tracked across women speaking up about how this impacted them, and the things that men like what we can learn from this range of women's responses. We're going to hit a number of other pieces here too that I found particularly interesting, and some of which I've seen others touch upon, some of which I haven't seen people touch upon at all. But what's been up for you around it? Are you sick of all the banter about this slap heard around the world? Do you find yourself identifying with Team Chris or Team Will or Team Jada, as if it is this big competition? And the truth is, I'd be very curious as to where they stand right now with one another. I'm very curious about what were the conversations that happened behind closed doors when Will and Jada went home that night. I'm curious about the like 30-year history that Will Smith and Chris Rock have with one another, including what I know is some conflict between the two in the past, and particularly about the derogatory comments that Chris made towards Jada in the 2016 time he hosted the Oscars, and how there are all these different complex layers involved in the situation that are generally not being addressed in most of these social commentary and even think pieces that I end up seeing out here. So let's get into the women component. All right. Let's see here. So I saw responses as simple as Jay doesn't need this. He's not doing it for her. She's a strong woman. Look at all the things that she's handled in the world. She tackles stuff. She tackles the most difficult parts of life in her Red Table Talk show. She's together. She's got it. She doesn't need Will to handle things for her. It's infantilizing to women. This notion that women need protecting. This is disempowering to women. So that's one end, and then the other end of responses I got were along the lines of, lots of me really loved it, and me too, and forget about being PC. Didn't your inner voice go, hell yeah? Mine did. Oh shit, but dang, that felt good. And since when did it become shameful to defend the honor of your wife and family? Sheesh. And then I don't know if you saw, like, I consumed a lot of this over the past few days, in part in preparation to speak on this today. But what I really want to take note of, these two different ends, is women as a whole are not a whole. They're clearly not a monolith. There isn't a single response, and a lot of that, and I'm seeing your comments come in. I'm going to respond to them in a moment. And one of the major factors here has to do with the woman's own life path, her own relationship to her sense of safety and security within herself, and her relationship and experiences with men and masculine expression, and elements of where that has felt truly protective, where that's been lacking, where there's been a yearning for more feeling of protection, or places of violation, places of harm, and including places of harm done in the name of love or protection. So we have a lot of very conflicting factors that play out amongst men and women in our society. And I'm going to hit a couple of these comments here as they've been coming in before I uh, continue the stream of thought. I feel like Will Smith is struggling to feel like Jada really loves him. Like he has to fill the gap Tupac left in Jada's life. I certainly see those speculations. I'm going to continue on. Interesting that a man who has publicly ridiculed a woman a couple of times is being portrayed as a victim. I think you're referring to Chris Rock and him publicly ridiculing Jada Smith the two times that he was hosting Oscars this past week, as well as in 2016. Honestly, his statements in 2016 were kind of more intense. um, Will Smith went from laughing with everyone at a joke to defending Jada's dislike of the joke in seconds. Okay, that I want to address because I have seen that argument repeatedly, and I think that it is missing something really key here. Two major parts of it. Will went from laughing with everyone at the joke. First things first here, particularly as somebody in Hollywood, somebody with celebrity status, as he said in his acceptance speech, that there's just kind of, you learn that it's just part of how things work. You just got to accept and even laugh along with the fact that you will be ridiculed, the butt of jokes, etc. And it's just, it goes with the territory. And tie in the whole like model minority element I spoke at the very start of the stream about, that Will has definitely internalized at a very deep level long ago that, like, look, there are just these certain things that you do to get along, to look good, to be that nice guy. Have you ever laughed at something, maybe even something directed negatively in your direction, just to kind of keep the peace, just to like, because that seemed to be the expectation, even though it didn't actually feel good inside, even though it actually hurt inside, maybe even it actually triggered feelings of anger or resentment inside? Because that's actually a very common experience. And so simply the fact that the camera caught him like actually chuckling along doesn't mean that, oh, that's his truth. That's how his real reaction. It could very much be um that's the trained reaction. But regardless, yes, the trauma part I think was instigated when he saw the look on his wife's face. And as others have laid out here before, last year, sometime this past 6 months, I think, Will's book came out, Will, and in it, there's a detailing of all of the domestic abuse that he grew up in, which we're going to touch on a little bit later as well, and how much shame he felt about as a child, as a boy, never not feeling like he was able to protect his mother, and particularly like not doing anything to protect his mother, and how he's carried a shame and guilt of that, of like not standing up even though he was a boy in the face of the man of his father, and carrying the shame of that throughout his entire life. So honestly, like looking at all this, seeing through my trauma informed lens in that moment, in that video, here's a man that clearly got triggered into a state of trauma. It was the moment of seeing that flash of that pain in his wife's eyes, combined with all the times and ways in which he's had to just laugh things off and pretend everything was fine, that ended up kicking him over into the strong trauma response. Yeah, I'm not on Team Will either. Okay, well, again, I think that the notion of whose team it is kind of a flawed way of going about this. Thanks for taking the time to make this podcast. I'm a cis lady, just for context, but something that sticks in my mind is what happened before the stop. Will laughed the joke too. This is among other things that left me feeling unsettled. Hopefully I just addressed that. Being triggered into physical reaction as a woman, this does not make me feel safe. It does not make me feel safe when fully adult men can't control their emotions. Well, you know what? This is a part that I really want to address in depth again, largely because I identify with it, and it has been such a huge part of my journey, and a part of my journey that I have really only been able to find a way to speak about more recently. And wasn't able to speak about it earlier for two reasons. One, I just didn't quite know how. I couldn't quite find the words. I didn't have the perspective on it. And two, I felt a lot of shame around it. But I struggled so deeply with emotional reactivity for so much of my adult life, where no, I was never physically violent, but I was emotionally violent. When this thing would get triggered inside of me, this like roar would come out of me. And it was intense. And in retrospect, I understand how it could be uh, quite scary. And again, the all the rest of me, which is, the vast majority of me, would have done anything to not react in that way, carried incredible shame about the fact that this would happen from me. And yet I felt like I have no idea what to do about it. It's not there 95, 99% of the time, but then something would suddenly touch it and wah, it would come out and it would feel like I am powerless in the face of it. I tried so many things to address this. So many things. We have such mixed messages when it comes to men and anger. On one hand, we get this message that it's the only emotion that men are allowed. And so, uh, and so there we have all these expressions of male anger in our society. All these we get, and then at the same time we get all these messaging around, the danger of men's anger. So I wanted so much to wrangle it in, to fix it somehow, to overcome it, to use my will, no pun, I guess a little bit intended, um, to override this. Hell, I tried a fucking shock device at one point that anytime I'd felt this like anger response would like start come out of me, I would like hit this thing and it would send this like this essentially like a electric shock impulse through me that was painful. uh, at one point I fucking burned myself. I think I still have faint scars on my arm where anytime this like came out of me, I lit a blade on fire and I pressed it into my arm, figuring, let me try a Pavlovian type of way of dealing with this. Strong, painful, negative feedback, and I will fucking like just like kill this thing out of me. A violent response to my violent response. And everything that I did, like nothing seemed to be working. I was told you just got to be a fucking samurai. You got to just be like, make that strong internal commitment, no more. But none of that helped. None of that did anything other than create more shame inside of me, make me feel more of a flawed human being. And yes, quite honestly, I think that these are some of the factors that really drove a lot of what I have done and built with the Evolved Masculine, because like I really crave to be better, to do better, and this part that just seemed out of my control. So the reason why I'm able to speak of this now is because I am largely beyond it. I still experience certain echoes of it. There's still certain elements I'm trying to move beyond, but I would say it's 95% moved through. And you know what the answer really was? The part that I feel like our society just does not address in all the ways that we want to either uplift men's anger, or we want to just bash the fuck out of men for angry responses. The part that is not addressed is those types of reactions are a result of trauma. They are a result of trauma in the body and trauma in the system. And I really wish I understood this years, if not decade plus earlier. That the reason why I had an uncontrollable reaction in those moments is that I had old, unresolved, childhood based trauma that when it would get touched, it would just react and take over. We speak so much in our society today where about trauma and having a trauma informed lens, and how we need to be aware, particularly of women and their freeze and fawning response in the face of potential violence, and the flee response. But we don't necessarily have the same kind of compassion for the fight reaction of a trauma response. But it's still a trauma response. And the only way I was able to finally start to really get a hold of control over my emotions in this way was by finally really confronting and moving through the deep trauma that my body held. Things I did not understand earlier. And to seek out help and support that allowed me to work with this trauma, to understand my trauma, and more importantly, to move this trauma through my body and out of my body. And then as that really happened, as this trauma started to really move, it wasn't so much about me learning to control my emotions anymore. In many ways, it was just like the reactivity just stopped. It just wasn't there in the same way. And then where it seemed like there was more of a gap between stimulus and reaction. From stimulus, whatever it was that would trigger, it seemed like there was a little bit more space between that and my ability and what would just be a emotionally violent reaction. And in that space in between, I now had tools to be able to calm my nervous system, adjust, and keep things from getting so wildly out of control. So I wanted to get to this a little bit later in things, since again, I really do have a desire to go into today about decoding women and this element of women's responses to all of this and what it says to us as men about what women really want. But I felt really, I don't know, I felt really called in that moment to share this, that we don't speak about this enough. And I have worked with enough men, I have listened to enough men to know how many men struggle with a temper, with their anger, and quite frankly, how little support we can often feel about what to do with that. That the main thing that we get is, stop, don't do that. You don't want to, like, you're essentially, you're scum of the earth. You are that perpetrator. You are everything that's wrong with our society. When what I hear from a lot of men, like, if they knew what to do or how to do anything differently, many of them would. And so I'm a very big believer that a core part of healing the traumas of this world, that by and large we're focused on right now, the traumas that men commit and inflict on others. But I have definitely come to believe very strongly that those traumas that men inflict on others are not going to stop until we address the traumas that men are holding inside of them. And what I saw on screen was a man with trauma held inside of him that in that moment got away from him. That in that moment, for likely what seemed to be a perfect storm of circumstances, led that trauma to overtake him. The fight response, trauma response come out, and him do something that hopefully we are using as a focal point for growth in our society, and not just another way to play tribal games of whose team are you on, who's right and how are they wrong, but really, how do we develop bridges of understanding, empathy, and compassion for one another, and even towards ourselves. Do you think Mr. Smith feels shame too? Do you think that where this triggered slap came? Do you think that's where the triggered slap came from? Well, first of all, I think I've read this in two ways, and the answer is yes to both of them. One, I do believe that he likely holds shame today about his actions on Sunday, and I believe that the shame that he holds within him also helped lead to the snap that led to the slap. The shame that he's held within him for not defending his mother and leading him to act quote unquote unreasonably to defend his wife, who in that moment is sort of that stand-in for doing then what he wished that he could have done to defend his mother all those years ago. Okay. I want to get back to what Lisa said here about I can say as a woman does not feel it does not make me feel safe to be in the presence of a adult man who's in that place of triggered reaction. No, of course not. I totally get that, and I am well aware at this point despite all of the incredible efforts that I put into to creating safety with the women that I've loved in my life, and some some ways I got enormously, that's a weird way of putting it, that I got very good at creating safety for the people around me and the women in my life and the women who I loved. I've developed very strong skills in this area. But then I could have this triggered reactivity that doesn't matter what I do over here, create all the safety here, and then this incredible feeling of lack of safety over here. And what I see in retrospective, how much of a mind fuck that must have been for the women who loved me. To, on one hand, to feel safer in my presence than they'd ever felt with a man before, and then to feel less safe, possibly, than they've ever felt in the presence of a man before. God, I mean, I definitely feel a shame and regret for what for how I showed up then, and also, again, I try to have a certain compassion for who I was then. And I learned this phrase very long time ago: how everybody is doing the best that they know how to do with the resources they had available to them at the time. I know, looking back at that younger me, how much I tried, how much I cared, and how much of what I was developing at that time, because I cared so much, serves me and the people that I work with and my audience now, because I did develop all these skills while I was suffering from and reacting from and causing suffering from this other part within me. And then ultimately finding that way through, coming to understand trauma and the way it was living out through me. So yeah, that kind of reactivity, if you have that kind of reactivity in your system as a man, if you have that type of a strong emotional response, and I'm going to pull some of these things on here for a moment. Here we go. Look at this. And that having that kind of strong reactivity in your system, like, it is having an effect on those closest to you. And my strong encouragement and suggestion is to not allow any shame that you may or may not hold within you to keep you from getting help or support, but rather, and I'm aware that as men particularly, we don't, getting that kind of support can feel anathema to everything that we're taught and trained around being a man. That you're just supposed to figure it out on your own. It's you against the world. You've got to sort it all out. And I know these things. I've lived through them myself. And not every man struggles with these things, but I found a lot of men do. Get support, because there is support out there. And it may happen the shift might happen more quickly than you imagine. It may take time. But if you want the women in your life, your wife, lovers, your daughters, to truly feel safe around you, doesn't really matter what else you're doing and what else you're addressing. This will always interfere until it is truly addressed. That has certainly been my experience. And like I said, I've worked with enough men by now to know that it goes beyond just me. My hope is that this is a teachable moment for all, and they make up and maybe do a show on it with therapists to get to the heart of it and heal. If that happens, my guess is it'll be Jada who makes that happen. She seems to be a very strong driving force for that kind of thing, including especially with her show Red Table Talk. I love what she's done with that show. That there is very much that opportunity, and from what I understand, like the things going on between Will and Chris are go on beyond just that one night, and there's loads that we don't understand. I mean, that's the thing as a society, and this is part of our big mirrors, how quick we are to judge, how quick we are to point fingers, how quick we are to say and think what we would have done or what we wouldn't have done when we know such a small little piece of what's going on. So I've done my best to listen, to really take time between that moment and now to understand different perspectives, to dive it in, to try to find out what I don't know and what I don't understand. And again, my initial response was about more of an admittance of my own fallibility, that I know I'm capable of that. I know I'm capable of that. And so I guess I ask you as well, like, one, is there some part of you that you are aware of, that you connect to, that is capable of that? And how do you feel about that fact? Because the other element that was really on display to me through the social media commentary is how some people feel the same way. And some people respond with things like, well, violence is never the answer. And take a kind of a complete pacifist type of a response here. And while this part of me that can be reactive is not a part of me that I'm proud of, and I do look at it as a part that is that just is constantly asking for me to give it attention, to learn and grow. And this is part of my path. I'm aware this is part of my path, and one that as I walk it, I hope that I can be adding value and turn into teachable moments, especially for other men who have ever struggled with their own temper or anger, and as well as for women who have either have struggled with their own or have been with men who clearly have struggled with theirs, to increase this level of understanding, compassion, and empathy, to increase our awareness of the impacts of trauma and how the traumas that men experience and hold in their systems, how can we take them more seriously? How can we create more social support for them? And particularly how we as men, we need to do more than just fucking isolate ourselves from each other, and actually form deeper sense of connection and community and brotherhood, where we can speak so more openly and freely and with one another, where we can support one another, be there for one another, share those difficult things, those vulnerabilities, without needing to prove something. Okay, I'm gonna keep going. There are a couple of people asking about. Hi there, John. Good to see you here. There are a couple of people asking about. Can you share more about what specifically helps most to resolve and heal your trauma triggers? Thanks. And then I think there's another comment around, really glad you were able to heal from your trauma. By the way, tools are awesome. Yes, they are. So first of all, I want to say that statement of that I was able to heal from my trauma. I just want to put a caveat there. It's not binary. I'm not healed. I am a work in progress. I have done enormous amounts of healing around this and other areas of my life, and and, uh, it's I believe that we all have these certain things that, well, either we just let run the show for our entire lives and we try to basically pretend aren't there, or you know, just try to avoid addressing for our entire lives, or there are some things that we can just address and we're good and we move on to the next level in our lives. And then I think that there are certain things that just end up being part of our dharma, part of our life path, is like this is part of your journey. You're going to be working on this and with this through your life. And I relate to this in that category. It's sort of like how uh, people who are alcoholics uh, will often refer to themselves as a recovering alcoholic for the rest of their lives. That they recognize that they're never not a recovering alcoholic, that it could easily um, relapse, fall like even 20 years later or more. Something leads to like one drink that ends up leading to another, and boom, they're right back. It's more like a recognition that they have this tendency within themselves, and that if they don't have a certain kind of vigilance around it, boom, like it's going to express once more. And I think that I relate to this in that way, that who knows, time, like life is long, and if I look at the trajectory of my life, it's still relatively recent phenomenon of that I have felt like I have largely moved through this trauma reaction in my body. But I do relate to it as I'm going to keep working on this and keep working on this and look for any and all of the places, however minute, however small in life, that it shows up. And it's through addressing it in all the little teeny ways that sort of like whittles it down and whittles it down. And if I just stop giving it any attention, like, I don't know, it could very well come back for all I know. And now I have a family, and my drive to really make sure that my trauma is moved through as fully as possible is higher than ever. I'm well aware that the whatever I don't address, whatever I don't heal within myself, is going to get passed on to my kids. They're going to end up having to either run from it their whole lives or do the fucking hard work and heal and address it in their lives. And God, I so don't want that, I so don't want that. Parenthood is an incredible driver for growth and transformation if you allow it to be. So to answer those questions of can you share more specifically about what helped most to resolve and heal your trauma triggers? I will do my best. First of all, one of the reasons, I'm just going to be real here, one of the reasons why I was able to address it when I did versus when I was younger is I'm more resourced now. I have, I've built a successful business. I have some money to play with, and I've invested a lot into my healing. And, when I was in my 20s or early 30s, that was not the case at all. If it wasn't like right in front of me and free, I probably wasn't going to do it. And so, but I've also found that whatever and however I could invest into myself and my growth and my healing and my change has always been like the best use of my resources. So I've done both, like working with a psychotherapist who specifically works with like anger management, anger related issues. And I had a hard time with that at first because the therapy model and the coaching model are so different. Like I set very clear outcomes. And we're like, I try to move things forward with my clients at a pretty rapid pace. And there's like every time we're in shared space together, we're working on like a specific way to move the needle forward in a notable way. Whereas the therapy model can often feel like, so what's happening here? Like, is anything happening here? But it is through that consistency that things start to shift. And so I did notice this, things did start to shift. Just simply having a space where I could dive into and speak so openly and non judgmentally about these experiences that I had, what was going on, places that I'd long held such shame, to feel like I can speak them and, not get any sort of reactivity, negativity, judgment, or whatever thrown my way. That alone, the releasing of shame itself, helped something heal that actually helped it not come out in the same way. If that makes sense. Not it it helped heal the wound in the first place. And different tools that I was given, of course, to help work with that space between stimulus and reaction, from the thing that would hit the trigger to any sort of response within me, and to notice when I think prior to that, it just seemed like, again, like a binary switch. I wasn't triggered, I was triggered, and in reaction. So instead, like, that there would be things that would often be this like build up, and to notice it as soon as it would start to move at all, and to start working with those tools to recalm my nervous system, so that it doesn't have to hit that point where now it's going to fucking go and there's nothing I can do about it. So that's one set of tools that were very, very helpful for me. And the other is somatic healing, working with a pair of somatic healers. I worked with this couple called named Jonathan and Heike Hudson, sextraordinaryliving.com, who have since become very close friends of mine. And they did a form of hands-on. Parts of it were very much working with sexuality. Parts of it were working with other things, but more than anything, about really finding where the trigger lives in the body and connecting it to like deep memories that live within the body, and helping me repattern those memories and move the constriction and the wound out. It's a little bit hard to explain. It was kind of pricey, and it was arguably the most powerful healing work I've ever done in my life. So these are some of the things that have really worked for me. And then, of course, there's just all the tools I've worked with just over the course of my personal development and spiritual journey, and working with breath work, the things that I teach around sexual self-mastery, and which have taught me so much about working with the energetic body, period. I mean, all we're talking about here is energy, and working with a powerful amount of energy, and how to both contain that energy, how to move that energy intentionally rather than just via reaction, how to ground that energy. So again, like, once in the trigger, I feel like that's extremely difficult. But if you can notice just before it hits that point of no return, so to speak, there's so much that you can do. So, all right, now I want to address this range of responses I've seen from women about witnessing, one a man respond to an insult to his wife, wife's like medical condition that he's likely experienced her deep pain and struggle as she's moved through various stages of acceptance of having alopecia, and the effects that's having on her, and her sense of beauty, her sense of femininity, her sense of value as a woman in this world, and things that he will likely know far better than I do. And what I do know is those types of experiences in a woman that you love, that you've committed your life to, that you've raised a family with, that you've been through the deepest and darkest periods of life with, that you've had enormous conflict with, some of which public, who you have gone through to the other side and experienced incredible bliss states with, incredible sense of connection and deep intimacy that you'd never known was possible before, that when you have the entire range of depth with somebody, that their emotions and the kind of being an extension of your own. And so for some women, there is this response of, look, Jade is a strong woman. She don't need Will or anybody else to take care of her or protect her. She can fucking handle shit. And then other women responded with, what a breath of fresh air. It's like we don't see that type of thing anymore. I'm actually going to read a part from my book that I marked here that I think is very relevant. The Evolved Masculine: Being the Man the World Needs, the one she craves, available on Amazon and wherever books are sold. And this, I want to share this chapter because this was where I took in my lessons around this. Hopefully I can keep this entertaining enough for you. It's chapter 19, Protect the Feminine. It was New Year's Eve 2007. Kirsten and I were performing at Sea of Dreams, a 10,000 person event in San Francisco. It was by far the biggest public performance I had done with her. She did a trapeze act 25 feet up in the air. In the upstairs VIP area, she and I did a combination lap dance, pole dance, acro balance duet together that we had been working on for months. We followed it with a sword and contact juggling duo performance inside of a giant inflatable snow globe with about a story high, way above the crowd of many thousands of people during a Thievery Corporation set. It was, in a word, phenomenal. Setting the stage. At the end of the long night, we met an extremely charismatic man named Yuri, who had a very strong and intense energy. He invited us back to his place, tempting us by saying he had an infinity pool set to 104 degrees, perfect hot tub temperature. Wow. Infinity pool, hot tub? Given that Kirsten and I were both novelty junkies, constantly seeking new adventures, it was no brainer that we would go. On the drive to his place, which was with one of his minions driving, he was sitting in the back with us, scraping sassafras or organic ecstasy off of a crystalline rock with a knife and giving it to us in hefty doses. This was yet another new experience I eagerly and literally gobbled up. By the time we arrived to his place, we were both already rolling hard. We arrived at his place and immediately understood that this man was a total baller. There were half a dozen people wandering around the house who appeared to be his crew, and it was clear that he was head honcho. His place was opulent. The crappy little one-bedroom apartment that Kirsten and I shared could have easily fit in his living room with room to spare. We sat down just as Yuri began rolling a joint. We were high to the point of becoming disoriented, but feeling oh so good. The next thing I'm able to recall is Yuri climbing all over us and trying to make out with both of us. I would look over to check on Kirsten. She seemed to be having a great time, so I continued to go along with it, though it wasn't exactly my thing. Slowly, Yuri became more aggressive and was clearly trying to push things towards sex. I could sense that Kirsten was a hard no, which honestly relieved me, but Yuri didn't pick up on it. Either he didn't notice or he didn't care. Instead, he was so intent on getting what he wanted that he was unconcerned about our needs and desires. It reached a breaking point where I literally had to push him away and off of Kirsten. He stopped for a few moments and then started trying to climb on top of us while... What does that say? Well, something, I think there's a little blot on the book, attempting to yank down her pants or my pants. Oh, alternately, attempting to yank down her pants or my pants. I could feel Kirsten starting to shut down. As he became more aggressive toward us, I became more aggressive in my pushback. He would back off and engage in casual conversation with us, only to leap back onto us once more, clawing at our clothes. He seemed to believe that all he had to do was stop for a minute or two and then just go right back after what he wanted, regardless of the consistent display of our boundaries. This is my most direct experience with being on the receiving end of a man's persistence in the face of a clear no, in line with the intensely troubling stories I have heard from so many women. This is a prime example of the problem that can arise when men are taught that we're supposed to be the constant driving force towards sex. The narrative that has been taught and rewarded in our society is that it is our job to make it happen, and that any resistance from her is just a token expression that she musters up so you don't think she's a slut. Some men are taught that this token resistance is like a challenge, that's simply something that we're supposed to get around so that we can get what we want without thinking less of her and her sexual appetite. I felt Kirsten shut down. If I hadn't been there, I can only imagine what that she would have frozen, as she was already starting to do, which is a common automatic defense mechanism triggered in the face of a threatening situation, and that he would have raped her. And chances are, in his mind, he wouldn't have thought he had done anything wrong. Unfortunately, and we're getting to the truly relevant here, the story doesn't end here. Having spent so much of my life being raised in a blue-collar working-class family that always struggled to get by, and then once off on my own, having lived around the poverty line for another decade after that, I was enamored by Yuri's wealth. I was both fascinated by and fearful of the power he held. It was like being starstruck. I was in constant observation of and seduced by the way the people around him looked to him, followed him, and did what he said. Despite that extremely questionable experience, to put it lightly, we continued to get together with Yuri over the next couple of months. There were always lots of high-quality drugs flowing, all provided by him. He took care of and paid for everything. He did not try to engage with us physically again. It was more like we were folded into being part of his posse as his own personal entertainment. One time, when we were all together hanging out in Yuri's grandiose home, we brought my dear friend Jacqueline with us. Once again, Yuri was doling out massive doses of his famous sassafras, possibly even larger amounts this time. The drugs were so strong and we could barely move, and our eyes were vibrating and rolling back in our heads. Whew. We were rolling extremely intensely, riding wave after wave of wild ecstasy and euphoria while being in a complete stupor. At one point, Yuri grabbed Jacqueline's hand and began to lead her away. I remember feeling discomfort in that moment, but thinking to myself, Jacqueline's her own person. She makes her own choices. It's not my right to interfere, and this has nothing to do with me. I kept my focus on Kirsten, making sure she was okay. So here, this part here, this very much comes back to, it's not a man's job to get to protect women. That's just benevolent sexism. Women can take care of themselves. She's a strong woman. She's got it. This is hers to deal with. Mind my own fucking business. Even though I told myself it was not my place to intervene, the fact was it was my responsibility. Jacqueline was at his home for one reason only. I had invited her. She trusted me. Of course, that night, he did the same thing with her that he did when I first met him. He filled her with drugs to the point of total incapacitation and then tried to fuck her. It's now 10 years later, and Jacqueline still doesn't know what happened that night. She doesn't have any memories beyond flashes of him trying to touch her pussy while she feebly tried to push his hand away. But being so fucked up, she couldn't really move. Other than that, her memories are blank. She says that not knowing if she was raped that night fucks with her head even more than the time when she knows clearly that she was raped. I failed Jacqueline that night. My education and beliefs at the time around equality and sameness between men and women had me denying any sense of role or responsibility as a man. As a result, a woman I deeply cared about may have been raped on my watch. I swore to myself, never again. Even today, I can feel the emotional anguish of having failed to show up and own that critical evolutionary male role of the protector. Never again. So there's a little bit of part two that further exemplifies this piece, but this really was the moment in my own journey of evolution. I'm going to guess this is 15 to 17 years ago, where I realized that the message that I had received this from, I don't know, we'll call a feminist, certain kind of egalitarian type of education and training, that men and women are the same. Like you don't treat the women in your life any differently than you treat the men in your life. That there was something flawed there. That the truth is that I am larger than most of the women in my life. I am stronger than most of the women in my life. That there is an evolutionary design role as to why and how we as men have the capacity to harm, but we also have the capacity to protect. And simply not harming, especially we're in a world where there is so much harm, simply not harming is not enough. Sometime later, I went to a house party of about 150 people in the Mission District of San Francisco. I ran into Jacqueline there, and she excitedly told me that she wanted to introduce me to a guy named Daniel, whom she was starting to get to know. All names have been changed, by the way. Daniel came by a few minutes later, and my alarm bells immediately went off. I'd seen Jacqueline with various men over the course of our multi-year friendship. I'd never experienced anything like this. Something inside of me was screaming, danger. After a brief hello, he quickly went on his way. I sat with that discomfort in my body. I didn't see him for the rest of the party until the end of that night. Jacqueline and I had decided to share a cab back to the other side of the city together as we lived walking distance apart. As we were heading down to the street from the party, I found out that Daniel was joining us in the cab to go back to Jacqueline's place. I did not like this. We were sitting in the taxi cab with Jacqueline in the middle and Daniel and me flanking her on either side. I was checking in with myself. Is this jealousy? I don't think so. This is very different from anything I felt with any other man she's been with. I said to her as discreetly as I was able, you don't have to do this. You don't have to take him home with you. She responded, oh, I don't know. Daniel doesn't listen to me. I shot back, that does not make me feel any better. Despite my attempt at discretion, Daniel clearly overheard me and started to become irate. Who the fuck do you think you are? He yelled at me. Where I'm from, interfering like that is asking for a fight. You want to fight? No, man. Look, I don't want to fight, but I'm not comfortable with you going home with her either. I responded as calmly as I could. He then reached over Jacqueline to try to take a swing at me. I parried as he tried a few more times. Stop it, man. You're going to hurt her, I exclaimed. I don't fucking care, he yelled back. I glared at him. Exactly, man. Exactly. I heard the taxi driver calling the police as Daniel's physical aggression continued to escalate. I could tell that everything in his body wanted to fight. As I tried to de-escalate the situation and physically block Jacqueline from inadvertently getting hurt, we could hear the approaching police sirens. Just as we saw the flashing lights coming toward us, Daniel jumped out of the taxi and disappeared into the night. We had the taxi take us both back to my place. When we got up to my apartment, Jacqueline started to unleash on me. How dare you? Who do you think you are? You had no right. I'm fucking pissed off at you. I felt bewildered, as it was so obvious and clear to me that I did what needed to be done. I told her, look, Jacqueline, I don't care if you hate me and don't ever want to see me again. I'm still really glad that I did what I did and intervened. Though she reacted very strongly in the moment, in the weeks afterwards, she expressed gratitude and honestly, ever since, what felt like a heightened respect for me. There's a reason why men throughout history have taken on the role of protector. There are rapists and violent men in our midst who have no intention of changing. I recognize that this piece is a knife's edge, because the very reason we need more men to be inspired protectors of women and the feminine is because there are men who, with very damaged relationships to their masculine, who walk among us. And sometimes it's the same person. Yes, women are rising in their power. Yes, women have incredible strength of will and far greater capacity than we as a society have historically given them credit for. Yet, the masculine role of protector is not a role to give up. It has been distorted by many men who confuse protection with control and ownership. However, there is a way that you can claim the role of protector in a manner that has her feel more free instead of less as a result. Being a husband and father, I now take my role of protector very seriously. It is a responsibility that I willfully and joyfully take on. I choose to hold the responsibility to keep my family safe, to keep an eye on the environment that we are in a state of relaxed vigilance. I am highly aware, but I am not tense. In owning my role of protector, I feel a responsibility to know how to protect and defend my family, those I care about, and those in my charge. The moment it crosses over into control is the moment that the evolved masculine protector has ceased and toxic masculine power drive has come out. I believe that providing protection for all beings who are more vulnerable than men, women, children, elderly, our planet, is an essential dimension of the evolved masculine. I believe that one of the greatest roles men can take on today is an evolved version of this protector role. The evolved masculine protector focuses on widening the container for her so she can feel safe to explore, to express, and to be. She should always feel more free in your presence as her protector, not less. It is the job of the evolved masculine to create a world in which all women feel safe, safe to feel free, to blossom, and to flourish. Questions for the reader. What is your relationship to the role of protector? How have you neglected this role? Hmm? How have you shown up in your past as the distorted protector? And what course correction could you implement to step more potently into your own evolved masculine protector? So this is why I had my own strong response to what I saw on screen. Yes, again, you could easily make the argument that what happened there was a quote violent response to a non-physical action. What were just words? What was just a joke, etc. And I think that more than anything, it does really pull us into these inquiries around who are we? Forget about them on the screen, but who are you? What is that you're craving? What are you connected to within yourself? What are you disconnected from within yourself? What do you judge about yourself or others? And so as I see a lot of women respond with notions of, part of me just exhaled and relaxed. Or what I read in your words, Destin, is that you wouldn't be complacent, and that feels good. That, yes, so women today are strong. There's so much sense of independence, and they don't quote unquote need a man to protect them. But it doesn't mean that women want to feel like they have to be the strong ones all the time. It doesn't mean that it can't feel good to feel like somebody's got your back. Doesn't necessarily, in fact, generally doesn't need to require a violent response. And I absolutely believe that, honestly, I absolutely believe that if Will Smith could do it all over again, he probably would have handled the situation differently and better, and certainly without the physical violence, as he expressed in his written apology afterwards. And again, when I said that I could see myself doing the same thing, it includes that as well. Reacting and then lamenting, recognizing that, fuck, I'm sorry, I wish I would have handled that better in the moment. And hopefully using it as an opportunity to learn and to grow for both myself and, the billion people watching. But I do believe that if there's anything that's being called forth from the masculine at this time, by the masculine, I'm using that word intentionally instead of men, because some women have incredibly developed masculine sides. If some women are more just innately connected to their masculine, some men are more innately connected to their feminine. Then, of course, there are those individuals who fall somewhere in between and don't really identify as man or woman. But regardless, this masculine energy, this that has so many different flavors to it, that including a protector, and that we are in a time period where over the past several decades, where women have been kind of rising up, and the feminine has been rebalancing as well, finding new expression, finding a greater sense of freedom in that expression, discovering more of her own potency. And that what's being asked of men and the masculine at this time is to create a world where women can do that, where women can feel more free to blossom, more free to be in their fullest expression. And so my encouragement for the men watching this is to come to know this part of yourself, to explore this part of yourself, the distorted protector that may live within you, and ways in which that part may have expressed itself in the past through means of control masquerading behind protection, and this more evolved masculine protector that allows those around you to feel more safe and more free and more fully expressed simply by being in your presence. and the safety and protection that your presence and the field that you create around you provides. All right, this whole thing's been largely a monologue. I hope you found something of value and interest in it. Um, as always, send me your thoughts, send me your questions. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Is there some part of this that really provoked something in you? Is there some part of you that now thinks less of me or is angry at me, wants to come forward and slap me upside the head? I want to hear it. Send them in. You could either respond to me in comments here via DM or support at evolvemasculine.com. Likewise, if you think that you'd be a great guest for our show, whether you are a woman who would love to dive in with me and help me play decoder of your deep desires and fears and concerns and what you're really wanting from men and have experienced with men, or whether you're a man who wants to be coached live on air to around your particular challenges and concerns around sex, women, and being a man in this modern world, send us a message. Same means. I'd love to see if you're a fit and bring you on and go on this journey of decoding women, decoding ourselves, decoding this fucking dynamic between us and how we can all do better and have more of what we all want. Thank you for this journey. Thank you for all the conversation and helping me kind of get clearer on all this for myself. Wishing you well. Till next time. Peace.